Alrighty, well, thank you all for joining today on a weekend. I know it's been a busy time lately and everybody's getting excited to be outside and do plant stuff and clean up gardens. And I know a lot of you have been learning that it's best for us to leave the leaves for as long as possible and to not send out all of our flower stems out into the trash or whatever, because there's all kinds of insects that are overwintering in there and they're really important. So it's important for us to protect them and not let them be buried in a landfill somewhere. But today we're going to be talking about native gardening, and this is just very basic, introductory. There are all kinds of resources out there if you want to get more involved. A great place that you can go to find more details is the Pollinator Alliance of the Heartland. We have a Facebook page right now and we're working on a website. So if you want to find that, there's all kinds of cool people on there that know a lot more about native gardening than I do. And my name is Michelle Biodrowski. I almost forgot to introduce myself. I am on the Iowa Prairie Network board, on the Pollinator Alliance of the Heartland board, and I am a environmental educator at Potawatomi Conservation here in Iowa. And plants are my obsession. I really am obsessed with plants. I have a master's degree in biology, but most of what I learned about plants has just come from my own experiences, not necessarily from school. And the more I learn about how important they are to our food web and to sustaining all of the other interesting creatures that share this earth with us, the more I want them everywhere. And my main theme for my entire life is to kill more lawn grass and replace it with native plants. So if you ever talk to me in person, you'll know I hate lawn grass. It has its place, but it's not the 40 million acres or whatever it is in the United States. We don't need that much grass. Anyway, so let's get started. This is just a quick overview. There's obviously a need. We'll talk about that. Some of the benefits that you can get and give to others from native gardening, and some of the rules and laws or workarounds that you might have to consider. Okay, well, this is kind of where we are right now. The current standard, and it's this paradigms of our standard is slowly shifting. It's very slow for anybody who is impatient like me and wants, natives everywhere right now. It's slowly changing, but right now, when it comes to human habitation of an area, it starts off on this green. So these green squares, the green shows natural habitat. So natural vegetative communities that support all of the species that rely on them. The 97% is down to 14%. It's over time. So this is somewhere in France, and I can't remember exactly where it is, but over time, as this city in France has expanded, we've lost more and more habitat, and we lose it, and it becomes more fragmented. So if you look at the 97%, you can see right where the city starts, and the green going through the middle of that white blob is the river. So the white is the human structures, cement, houses, lawn grass. And then over the years, of course, you can see urban sprawl happens just like everywhere. And more humans are being born. We need places to live, places to work. So the habitat is sacrificed in order for us to have what we want, which is places to buy food, places to go have fun, roads to drive on. And then over time, it just becomes more and more fragmented and isolated and tiny and non-existent. And for any species that can't fly, they're trapped on those little islands, and sooner or later, they'll run out of space. So something that we can do is to reintroduce the natural habitat that we have removed. So this is a map of Iowa. It's a land use map. And it shows just another example of that fragmentation and isolation. You can see the dark brown on there is cultivated crops. So we've got mostly corn and soybeans in Iowa. And then there's all kinds of little red specks. Those are our cities. And the hay and pasture, most of that's brome now. It used to be more mixed grasses, but now it's mostly brome. And then there's little tiny pockets of wetlands, little tiny pockets of forest, tiny, tiny, tiny pockets of prairie. So you can see if you're an animal that relies on these habitats and you need to move due to climate change or due to loss of habitat, it's going to be very difficult for you to go between the place where you can actually survive and find food and shelter, and to go through cultivated crop field or over roads or through cities. So it's getting harder and harder to move if we need to. And one of those reasons isn't just farmers. Iowa is one of the most converted states in the United States, and a lot of that's agriculture, but it's not all agriculture. Us urban residential people like to do our sprawling, and anytime we want to put in a new housing complex, we remove all of the vegetation that was there. I mean, regardless of whether it's high quality and native plants or just an old brome field, remove it all. Then they do all kinds of earthwork, and then they reseed everything to lawn. And if you know anything about lawn, there's not a lot of animals that need it or can use it. Someone that can use it though are Japanese beetles. Their larvae like to eat our lawn grass roots. So if you've got a nice big beautiful lawn, then you are producing more Japanese beetles for us. So not thank you. So we have 150 million acres of habitat and farmland have been lost just within the last 10 years. 10 years, 150 million acres more have been lost for what we've already been losing. And this is to expand cities and lawns, not to create more agriculture. So urban people, we play a big part in this as well. And there's a lot that we can do to help remedy the situation. We have this weird obsession, this weird addiction to lawn grass, and that's from England and Russia and places that are not the United States. And we've created a green monoculture carpet across the country. Just lawn, not roads, not concrete, not buildings, just lawn grass covers over 40 million acres. And what do? You look at it, maybe you run around on it, your dog poops on it. You spend all kinds of chemicals and water. Half of our water usage in the summertime goes to our lawns. So we don't necessarily need to completely destroy all lawns, which I think would be pretty cool, but it's probably not going to happen. But there is plenty of lawn that we can cut out and replace with native plants and keep the lawn where we absolutely need it or want it. And it's only getting worse. Our human population in the United States is projected to grow by 78 million people within the next 40 years. That's less than someone's average lifespan. And so we will just keep needing more and more housing complexes, and those housing complexes, if everything stays the same, are going to be reseeded to lawn grass. So there's a need, not even considering the aesthetics and the human health. All kinds of species rely on our plants. They can't survive off of an introduced non-native grass, which is basically what our lawn grasses are. It's not food, they're non-habitat. Yeah, you know, swallows like to zoom over them and pick up some insects, and, you know, deer will walk across them, but they're really not providing much. So what are some benefits to planting native? I have a feeling I'm preaching to the choir here, and that a lot of you probably already know a lot about the benefits to planting native, but let's go over some anyways. So on the left side here, of course, you're going to be using less water. If you choose the right native plant species for the right spot, you only have to water it when it's still either a seed or a seedling and it's just starting to get established. You water it then so that they can get their big strong roots, and then once they're established, you don't water them anymore. Again, you need the right plant species for the right spot though. You can't be putting a native wetland species on a dry hill. They won't survive. So also less chemicals. So when you plant natives, do not fertilize. Do not fertilize, do not fertilize, do not fertilize. Especially in the Midwest here, our native plants do not want extra fertilizer. Specifically, prairie plants are something we call E-selective. So they actually prefer or are healthier in soils that are crappy and not extremely nutrient rich. You'll see a lot of really invasive brome and reed canary grass in waterways, because all of that water is picking up all of the fertilizer in the farms, all the fertilizers on lawn grasses, and feeding that to those grasses that love that fertilizer and want it. Those are non-native, very invasive grasses that don't allow other plants to grow. So you'll be using less chemicals when you transfer over to native plants. Oh, and I see Steve, thank you. He said that that map of change was from Paris. So it was somewhere in France. Good job, Michelle. Mowing. So I think there's, I can't remember, I'm not good with stats, but people mow at least every other week during the growing season on average. So that's a lot of fuel, a lot of noise pollution, a lot of, extra carbon in the air, money, time, all of that fun stuff. If you have natives, maybe you'll mow them down in the spring, all of the dead sticks, or mow them down maybe once every 2 years in the fall. That's a lot less mowing than what our lawns require. And of course, money. Anything new that you do will cost upfront money. That's just reality. But in the long term, which we, especially Americans, don't think a lot in the long term, but it's really important perspective to check out once in a while, you will be saving plenty of money. You're not spending money on water. You're not spending money on chemicals. You're not spending money on fuel. You're not spending money on insecticides, herbicides, whatever you're normally spending on to keep your lawn green and cut. And if you have a lawn big enough where you actually have a service come and cut it for you, you wouldn't be spending it on that as well. And on the other side, the fun, pretty colorful side, and everybody looks so happy, native plants, just, fifth grade science, they are the basis of our food web, our ecosystems. Anybody that needs to eat any meat needs to eat a herbivore. And most of our insects, especially for birds, baby birds, most of our insects, I think about 90% of our native insects require native plants. Our introduced non-native plants have different chemical compositions in them, which our insects and a lot of other mammals have not been able to adapt to be able to eat. So it's just like you trying to eat a plastic chair. It's not food. It might look green. It's not food for a lot of species. And of course, our pollinators, they're caterpillars. For butterflies need leaves, and the butterflies, bees, hummingbirds, they need nectar and pollen. And those are the critters that keep us alive and help us have a wide, healthy, diverse diet. Like all of our fruits, lots of vegetables, very important for us to stay healthy, especially with our population. Our human population is very high, and pollinators help to increase the output of our crops. It makes it higher so we can get more fruit per plant when we have pollinator help. If we didn't have pollinators, things would get a lot more expensive, and we might not even be able to buy fresh fruit and vegetables because we couldn't afford it. Chocolate, I'm just gonna throw chocolate in there. That is not native to North America, but that needs a very specific pollinator. It's actually a little tiny fly, a midge, the chocolate midge. So if we don't have native plants and pollinators around the world, we're not gonna have chocolate. Just fake chocolate, like a Tootsie Roll or something. And I prefer real chocolate. So lots of benefits for our wildlife and for ourselves. Oh, I preempted my own thingy here. 90% of leaf-eating insects can only eat one or a few native plants. I think I said that, but this is a much cuter way of putting it. It's a sad caterpillar. So just because you have a green yard, green shrubs, green trees, does not mean they're food. If they're introduced plants, which most of our landscaping plants are introduced, they might not be edible. And if something says pest resistant, it probably means no one can eat it. And I'm not saying that you're bad if you have ornamentals. That's what we've all been trained to do. We've all been told by, marketing and consumerism to buy, and buy these things because they're interesting and from distant places. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. We're all learning that we need to make some changes. Just incorporating at least a few native plants into your yard really makes a significant difference. So a quick example of insects that can only eat one type of plant or one family of plants. This is, hopefully you recognize, our monarch butterfly. Insect that is we call them an umbrella species because protecting them, it protects a lot of other species indirectly. They have been on the brink of extinction for quite a while now. And there's been a lot of political and just a lot of pushback on putting these guys on the red list for endangered species. But their numbers are not doing well. They have been going up and down and up and down, but if you look at the trend for them, it's down, down, down. One of the reasons why is that their caterpillars have to have a type of milkweed. It's our Asclepias plants. So they can have butterfly milkweed, common milkweed, world milkweed. There's a lot of different milkweeds, but it has to be milkweed. They can't eat anything else. And if they don't have milkweed, we don't have caterpillars. You don't have caterpillars, you don't have butterflies. So that's one animal that we might actually lose because of loss of biodiversity. We've lost plenty, but that's another one. Here's an example of an animal we actually did lose. This is the Xerxes butterfly. This was, I think, an endemic. I think the word's endemic. So this butterfly was in San Francisco or San Diego. I can't remember. One of those places, one of the sands. And they required a certain type of food. And then there was a new shopping mall, new development going in where they survived and where they lived, and the habitat was removed, and they are now literally extinct. So if you've heard of the Xerxes Society, it's an invertebrate nonprofit conservation organization. They have so much information. It says it down at the bottom there, XERCES. So if you want to look up any information about how you can help pollinators, what you plant for pollinators, they're a very good resource. And they're named that because one of the butterflies have gone extinct because of human actions. And this wasn't very long ago. So I think I said this a little bit earlier. Native plants are the basis of our food webs. You can't have birds, you can't have foxes, you can't have butterflies, you can't have very charismatic species unless you have insects. And you can't have insects unless you have plants that they can eat. So for just a quick example here, an oak. So oak trees like our bur oaks or red oaks, those are all native to Iowa, Nebraska. They can feed over 500 species of caterpillar alone. So just our butterflies and moths, they're caterpillars. At least 500 of them can eat oak leaves. That's not including any of the other animals that eat acorns or are surviving because of oaks. We call those trees of life because they're just super versatile and they feed everyone. And for a quick contrast to that, a ginkgo, which is a really pretty tree, cool, awesome leaves, ornamental, comes from Asia. I can't remember where in Asia it comes from, but it's planted here a lot because they're pretty. They're really neat trees, but only 5 of our caterpillars that we know of can eat them. So they're not providing very much baby food for birds. And speaking of which, 97% of our North American songbirds require insects to raise their babies. Baby birds grow so fast, and they have to grow really fast because they are sitting ducks. Pun intended. They are pretty much a bowl of food for everyone. Everybody wants to eat eggs. They want to eat babies. They're very easy to predate and they're really nutritious. So they are growing as fast as they possibly can, and they need lots of nutrients. They need protein, they need fats, and those are the best things. The best ways of getting that is from insects. So baby birds need insects. Just gonna take a pause here and show you this sweet piece of paper I made. I don't know if it's backwards. Is it backwards? No, okay, good. It says Diverse Gardens. DIVERSEGARDENS. That's your special code for getting your points. This is to prove that you were here and you learned something good. Also, don't ever keep what you learned to yourself. You need to share this with others too. Are we good, Steve? Can I put it down now? All right, thanks, Steve. He's my co-pilot. All right, so what about us humans? You know, the animal that we're always the most interested, humans. Why do we care about native plants? Well, if you don't care about, you know, birds and butterflies and insects, you're just not a big fan, you don't see the point, well, you might be more interested in learning about these because they are what help us have an interesting, healthy, diverse, amazing diet. We are very lucky to be able to have access to these foods, and a lot of it is because of pollinators. So we have some things pictured here that either rely completely on insect pollinators or need insect pollination to help increase their yields so we can grow enough of them for them to be affordable for a regular person to buy. Such things like pickles, avocados, almonds, blueberries, chocolate, watermelons, all this good stuff. It's amazing stuff. We wouldn't have it without our pollinators. And if you want to keep eating that stuff, then there's something we need to do differently to be able to support the pollinators that make these things accessible. For whatever reason, it blew my mind when I realized that pickles would be something we would lose if we didn't have pollinators, because I freaking love pickles, and it just didn't connect until I saw the research. It was crazy. Pickles, they're really important. Pickles and chocolate, I don't want to lose those. So something else that native plants are good for, if you have issues, which we have this issue a lot, especially with our more and more hard, heavy rains that we're having. Instead of nice soft rains, we just have a bunch of water dumped on us. So native plants generally have very long, fibrous or very well suited roots for holding soil. And a lot of our ornamentals, especially this sodgrass, is a picture with, that's my hand, and right before the tips of my fingers is where that sodgrass root mass ends. So that's not much of a net to hold soil. If there's an issue anywhere, you're going to have a lot of erosion. If that was replaced with plants that have on average 4, 5, 15-foot long roots, that soil is probably not going anywhere for a while. If you can get if you have an area that's really prone to erosion, that's a wonderful place to start your native garden. And stormwater, that's becoming more and more of an issue as well. And all that stormwater brings any pollutants, it goes over in the roads, into our ditches and out into our rivers and into lakes and ponds and eventually into our ocean. So anytime you can slow or stop stormwater from getting crazy with our massive rainfalls is a good thing to help prevent a lot more pollution downstream. And having plants instead of just a lawn, having native plants helps create more of a sponge that sucks up more water than would it normally have absorbed. And then it also is just kind of like a structural, thingy that slows the water down instead of it just flashing over your lawn straight into the streets. This goes back to our super awesome strong roots. The dude holding up that I think it's either little blue stem or big blue stem grass is just giving an example of some of the roots that they have on average. This is normal for them. They might have even more than that. That dude's probably 6.5 feet tall. And that root system is curling up at the bottom. So it goes even further in, just shows the dramatically different root system than a lot of our ornamentals. And on the graph side, You can see where I'm pointing to lawn grass. These have lawn grass, Kentucky bluegrass, things like that generally have maybe, I don't know, 4 to 6 inches of roots. And there's a whole bunch of hundreds and hundreds of different native plants that would thrive and survive here that have a massive root systems that would really protect our soil from erosion. Okay, so there's a lot of benefits. Like I said, I feel like you guys probably already know that, you're aware. Hopefully I give you a couple more tidbits that you can chew on for a little while and help other people realize as well. But let's talk about actually putting in a native garden. Like where do you start? What do you do? Like, how is it even possible? I always would suggest you start small, unless you're a master gardener with plenty of time on your hands and lots of money to work with. You're going to want to start small, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You can always add every year as you learn more. You find different plants you like, you get access to different species. You can add it and add and add and always kill more and more lawn, and you'll be making me happy at least too if you kill that lawn and replace it with native plants. So good places to start are just, you know, issues in your yard to begin with. If you've got areas that are too dry for the grass to grow, too wet for the grass to grow, hillsides that the grass just won't stick to. A lot of grass is hard to grow, and there's all these chemicals and, you know, things you can buy to make this grass grow because it's not meant to grow here. This is not the habitat for that type of grass. So we have to constantly feed it chemicals and water it to, you know, water it all the time to keep it alive. So find a spot in your yard that's either just really not great looking lawn, or it's hard to mow, or it's inconvenient, and start there. So just a cute little example. This person on the left side here, they just had a plain lawn in front of the yard, and they decided to cut out a square of lawn. They still have other lawn out there for whatever they want to have it for, and they added natives. And this picture shows a ton of mulch. I would not encourage you to use a ton of mulch. I mean, just personally me aesthetically, I hate it when there's a sea of mulch and a couple of plants plugged in there. But if that's what it starts as, that's fun. Just keep adding species to that area until you have it completely covered. If you don't have a yard, not everybody does. My yard's really small. You can always put natives in pots on balconies. Encourage your office or business or whomever you work for to add natives there as well. It doesn't just have to be in your backyard. There's all kinds of areas covered by that 40 million acres of lawn grass. So there's plenty of spaces for native plants to go. And when you're thinking about native plants, you're like, oh gosh, okay, so what plants do I get? Well, you definitely want plants that are at least native to your state. If you can get plants that are native to the area of your state, even better. But you're going to want to think about having blooms for the whole growing season, because pollinators are alive and hungry the whole growing season, and they need blooms the whole time. So early spring, these are everything except for that goldenrod picture are all pictures from my yard. So in April, I have my violets start to bloom. And so my bumblebee queens, I call them mine. They're not really mine, they're my neighbors. Not my neighbors but the bumblebee queens are my neighbors. This is something that they can survive off of until other plants start to bloom. In June, we have spiderwort. That's a really pretty purple plant there. They need all kinds of nectar and pollen resources in the summer. Late summer, August, there's all kinds of other species like this wild bergamot that bloom. And then October, of course, is really important that you have species blooming in October for our migrating monarchs, and as well as for all of the other species that are still alive well into November, probably, depending on the weather. So you want blooms all year. And depending on what you have in your area, in your yard, people think a lot about prairie plants in our area when it comes to native plants. And of course, prairie plants are great for a sunny site. But, you know, Iowa and Nebraska wasn't just all prairie, it was mostly prairie. Now there's hardly any prairie left. But there was other areas. There's shady, dark wooded areas. There's wetlands, really dry areas. There's native plants for all of those habitats. There's native plants for really shady spots, shady wet, shady dry. Before European colonizers came and started changing everything, it was native habitat everywhere. So those plants can cover any spot you have. Okay, so now we're getting into the not so exciting part. Sorry. This is more about, well, how do you work with your neighbors to make this okay? Because we are not there yet in our society where native plants are, widely accepted, and especially neighbors who think they know more than you, or who just think things should be a certain way and aren't interested in change, might become problematic. So we're going to look at some ways of dealing with that. Before I forget, no, this reminds me, just so everybody knows, Council Bluffs as well as Bellevue. Bellevue was before us, but Council Bluffs is now a bee city. Pretty awesome. That means our city officials are committed to making changes that are better for our pollinators, using less herbicides, less insecticides, and incorporating more natives. So that's pretty exciting. I just wanted to say that before I forgot. So good job, Bellevue, for being the leader in that. We're chasing up to catch up with you. So native plant communities. I think I've said this over and over. They're essential to the survival of our wildlife, and they're essential to us. If we didn't have them, we probably would not exist anymore, or we'd be in big trouble, and we're heading that direction. So we need to start changing things before it gets too late. They also provide ecosystem services. So they provide things that you don't think of right away. But people are going to tell you, you can't put those native plants in your yard. That's going to look like weeds, or it's going to be against city codes, or against your HOAs. And they're going, some people, hopefully not. I really haven't had any issues, but some people might be fight about this and not want you to be changing your, socially accepted grass lawn into some native wildflowers. But you need to keep a growth mindset. We all do. We can start small, adapt, and change. I have moved around plants in my yard many times when I found out they grow too large for an area, or they just don't seem to thrive there very well. I am not an expert gardener. I am not a botanist. I'm just a person who's really interested in native plants. So I've learned a lot on my own, and hopefully you realize that you can make mistakes and you can adapt and change. It's not a one and done. Gardens are alive. They change constantly, and expecting them to be stagnant and static is not realistic. So being able to experiment is a good thing, and it's important to keep that in mind. And to do this, we have to educate ourselves. You're doing that right now by watching this video, and you can do more by finding out resources, going to the Pollinator Alliance of the Heartland Facebook. There's all kinds of resources there. The Xerxes Society has tons of resources. If you start to reach out and look a little bit, you're going to find probably more than you needed, or more than you can handle. But we're not enough. Steve, me, you guys here on the video, we're not enough. Green Bellevue, not enough. Iowa Prairie Network, not enough. Bee City, not enough. We need this to be commonplace, and we need it to be a regular thing that almost everybody does. Like how almost everybody has a lawn. That's how we need native plants to be. So in order to do that, we need to engage with others to spread these ideas. And the best way to engage with others is not to, be someone who is looking down or condescending on others because they don't know about native plants yet. You're not going to win any friends that way, and you're just going to have people closing their doors in your face if you start that way. So please be humble and kind, and share in a open and welcoming way, because we really need this stuff to happen so that we can empower everyone to make these changes. I wasn't born knowing about native plants. I didn't grow up having nature gurus guiding me along my path. I found out late in life that these things are important. And I used to be a completely different person until I found this out. So don't, don't try not to be down on anyone who hasn't learned it yet. They just need you to help them. Okay. Here's I'm trying not to be super depressing this whole time, so I sprinkled in some some quotes from other people, because we're not alone. We're not enough, but we're not alone. There's a lot of people that are doing this work as well, and that are smarter than me, smarter than you, and they just need some support, just like we need some support. So it's going to take all of us who care about the natural world to keep the momentum for change going. We're not alone. Don't forget that. It's easy to feel overwhelmed with all of the stuff that's happening, but you're not alone. There's a lot of other people that care just like you do. Okay, let's get to the sexy part of the whole thing. Municipal codes or city ordinances. I'm sure you guys are all you were just waiting for this part. It's so exciting. So depending on where you live, there might be codes or ordinances that will that you'll just need to work around. None of them will stop you. HOAs might be slightly different, and you shouldn't just, agree and then give up. But these municipal codes and city ordinances should not stop you. You just have to learn how to work with them. So to be able to know where what your codes even are in the first place, well, you've got to find them, because they're not going to be in your face. They're weirdly hidden and they're hard to find. At least it was for me. So if you do an internet search, municipal code or your city's ordinances, I did Council Bluffs ordinances, or you can go to library.municode.com, and there's a lot of the different cities listed there. That's where you can find these rules or guidelines. And once you get to your city's municipal website, the easiest way to do it is to search for weeds. Do not search for weed, search for weeds, because you'll get into something completely different than what we're talking about today. And you'll look for something like weed nuisances. That's going to tell you what the rules are. So a lot of municipal codes are different, but Council Bluffs at least says that weeds are worthless. They're deemed undesirable or having no useful purpose or value, and they're a nuisance. In my head, that's brome grass all the way, but that's okay. That's just me. Our native or pollinator gardening, butterfly gardens, native plant landscaping, whatever you want to call it, micro prairies, they're not these things. They are the opposite. There is something you have to watch out for, though. Noxious weeds are state regulated invasive species that are not going to be allowed, even if it's beneficial for pollinators. Pollinators love Canada thistle, which is the picture we have here, but Canada thistle is an invasive non-native plant that will take over a field. It's very invasive, so those things will not be allowed, even if they are beneficial to pollinators. So if Iowa has a state noxious weed list, so does Nebraska. Every state does, so you can find out what yours are and keep an eye out for those species. Okay, so this is what Council Bluffs says, and I highlighted the important parts. Council Bluffs says all shrubs, blah, 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 plants, vegetation, blah, 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 should be kept trimmed back from all streets, sidewalks, or alleyways, so they don't get in the way of cars and people walking around. So if you do have your native garden in the front of your house or on the side of your house where driveway is, where sidewalk is, in the, what do they call that? Hill strip between the sidewalk and the road, make sure you choose species that are shorter and that can survive those conditions. So they're not flopping over into the road and they're not flopping over onto the sidewalk. That's not going to be allowed, especially, at least not here in Council Bluffs. And then the bottom one, all shrubs, hedges, flowers, plants, blah, 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 in the public right of way shall be trimmed. So keep these things trimmed. It says 30 inches or above, but just keep them trimmed and clean and away from the edge of the street. I always prefer to have frames around my plantings, either a sod, just a strip of sod that's like the length of your mower, or even a little cute little fence, or whatever it is you want. Just a frame around that garden will look much more aesthetically pleasing to your neighbors and to the city sanitarians, so you're less likely to be harassed by it, about it. And then homeowners associations. I know a lot of people have homeowners associations. I don't know what their rules are. It's going to be different for each one. You want to look for the covenants, conditions, and restrictions for your HOA. Do your homework, find out what they are before you start digging. You might have specific restrictions that you have to either figure out how to get around, or different rules and different maintenance requirements. Maintenance is a big deal. Some people think that native plants means no maintenance. That's not reality. You do still have to maintain. It's just very different. It's more of a, I feel like it's more of like a haircut when it comes to native gardens. You could be moving species around, you could be trimming them, but it's not the intense, I don't know, sterile way that we maintain lawns, but there is maintenance. So your native gardens are a benefit to the whole neighborhood, not just you, not just the pollinators, not just wildlife. Everybody's actually going to be benefiting from this. And if you have an HOA or city, neighborhood, whatever it is that you're working with that are not amicable to native plants right away, here are some things you can talk about or mention to help kind of let them know that it's a better idea than what they think. Most people are scared of change, and this is change. So sometimes change is difficult. Most of the time change is difficult, but that's good. We want things to change. So highlight the financial benefits. If you have an HOA that mows, that mows for you, they're going to be spending less time and money on mowing if we have more native gardens and less sod to mow. Less watering is, of course, a big deal, especially with areas who are low on water and don't have a lot of access to rivers. Some of our rivers are even getting lower, so water is going to be becoming more and more of a big deal. And if you don't have to worry about watering, it's one less thing to worry about. Our native gardens are absorbing more stormwater, like we talked about before, so you have less flash flooding, you have less pollutants going into our creeks and storm drains, and then you're using less chemicals. And, you know, even if it's been used for a while, I see people just walking around spraying chemicals on every single little dandelion, you know, just sprinkling fertilizers all over their yards. Chemicals are not good. There might be safer chemicals for us than others, but we don't know exactly what the long-term effects are on all of these chemicals. And I definitely do not want my dogs or nieces and nephews running around on lawn that has been treated with chemicals. We don't know what they're going to do. So it's better just to use the least amount possible. You could create a neighborhood partner, our neighborhood pollinator partnership. If you like to hang out with your neighbors or you have friends that are nearby, start a group with them. I know that I have harassed all my friends constantly until almost all of them have started pollinator gardens in their yard. And a lot of their plants came from my overflowing pollinator garden. So it's a good way to make friends by giving people plants. And sooner or later, they'll get tired of your plants, but you'll still have friends. And lead by example. If you have an HOA or whatever that is not friendly to these kinds of things, join the board. Start making changes yourself. See, you know, get on it. Do some work. Don't just take no for an answer. You know, there's no such thing as no. That's not it. We're not going to do that. Really? Why? Why can't we do that? Start asking questions. Make some changes. Be annoying. Be uncomfortable. Okay, so here are some things that people are probably going to say to you when you mention native landscapes, and if they're not already, you know, big on the landscapes. Again, most people are really not. They haven't heard about it before. They haven't learned about it. It's not that they're stupid. They just haven't had the chance to learn about native plants yet. So they might be falling into some of these myths. So our natural landscapes, they are attractive, especially ones that are well kept. Not having your plants flopping over. They're beautiful. Native flowers are way more interesting. Native grasses are way more interesting than lawn grass, in my opinion. I'm extremely biased, but you can try it out before you take my word for it. They do not decrease property values. People are going to say, oh, you're going to decrease our property values. We're not going to be able to sell our house. That's not real. They actually increase property values. People are going to say, oh, you can't have native plants. You're going to start our houses on fire. No, no, they're not. It's not realistic. It takes about 7 minutes of an intense, constant fire to start a house on fire from the outside. And if you have native plants along your house, they are not going to be on fire for that long if they do catch on fire, which they could when they dry out and it's really dry. We've had more and more wildfires happening lately. So it's a possibility that they start on fire. They are not going to burn your house down. It's not going to happen. Vermin. Native plants attract vermin. You're going to have rats running around the neighborhood, and snakes and opossums are going to take over. No, that's not either. You only get massive amounts of mice or rats in areas that have like huge spoiled piles of grain on the ground. So like cattle operations, a lot of times will have issues with rodents because they have grain everywhere all the time feeding the cows. And the amount of seeds that your native plants are going to make are not going to be enough to attract, hordes of vermin. If anything, it'll attract some predators and help keep our area more balanced. Mosquitoes. I don't know why, but people always think native plants are going to add more mosquitoes. So yes, mosquitoes do need plants. I know it's more mosquito-y in the area in the back of my yard where my trees are than it is in the front where all the shorter native plants are. Because mosquitoes, the males will drink nectar and juices from the plants, and the females, of course, are hungry and need lots of energy to make their eggs, and they like to drink our blood. So they are a thing. They're actually a really important species in our food web and our ecosystem, and we don't want to lose them, although people like to kill them because they're annoying. We actually really need them. A lot of birds eat them like crazy. Bats eat them like crazy. If you like hummingbirds eat a lot of insects. They eat a lot of mosquitoes. They're needed. But what's not going to happen is having a rain garden or native plant community is not going to be increasing your mosquito load, because I think, again, I can't remember facts or I can't remember numbers very well, but I believe the fastest growing mosquito larva in the United States takes like 10 days of water to be able to grow and metamorphosize into an adult mosquito. So to get that, what you need is a lot of like tires lying around with stagnant water. So you need a lot of stagnant water to get a lot more mosquitoes, and having native plant communities is increasing the ground's capacity to absorb water. So that's kind of the opposite. So don't worry about mosquitoes. Allergies. People always freak out. Oh my God, that goldenrod gives me my allergies. My grandma was allergic to goldenrod. No, probably not. Maybe, but probably not. Goldenrod is a beautiful plant. It is insect pollinated. So that means it doesn't just explode pollen into the air everywhere. Their pollen is heavier and stickier than the pollen that goes into the air. What does bloom at the same time as goldenrod is called ragweed. And ragweed has smaller, less obvious flowers, and that pollen is spread by the wind. So a lot of people will have ragweed allergies or grass allergies or tree allergies. Those plants like to, they don't like to, they do spread their pollen by wind. And they'll just think it's the goldenrod, because I don't know how that myth started, but just because they bloom at the same time, people think that's what causes their allergies. And some people are legitimately allergic to specific plants, but just in general, it's not going to increase your allergies. Something we need to remind ourselves. Regardless, I hope that none of you have to deal with angry neighbors or people that come knocking on your doors because you have native plants. But it's important to remember, if you do have challenges or obstacles in the way of making good change, is to remember that a thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community, and it is wrong when it tends otherwise. And what we've been doing with all of our concrete and our lawns and our ornamental plants that aren't food for anyone has been the otherwise. And so we've been doing it wrong for a while. Again, we're not evil, we're not bad. It's just how we were taught but you always got to keep learning. And when you learn something new, change the way you work. That's Aldo Leopold, by the way. If you want to read Aldo Leopold, he's got a lot of great conservation writings. Okay, so that was my spiel. I think we could open up to questions, Steve, if that's okay.
Sure. In fact, Don's already posted one in the chat. He wanted you to comment on integrated pest management versus chemicals.
Okay, yeah. So integrated pest management is an excellent route to go. It basically just means find out the actual cause of the issue. Is this issue really something you need to treat? Is this issue something that's going to devastate your yard, or is it just going to make one of your plants kind of gray? What is it? Dusty mildew? What's that mildew? Powdery mildew. Powdery mildew is something that people will buy chemicals for to kill. It's a mildew, it's a mold. It's actually a natural thing that happens to a lot of plants. Some plants are really, they can get it pretty easily. Some plants don't. I'm not a plant expert, but I've seen dusty mildew in my yard. It's never really done anything to any of my plants except for make them look weird. So find out like what's the real issue with your plant. I have Japanese beetles in my backyard, but they don't devastate any of my plants because I have diverse species out there, lots of different species, and I have more than one plant. I don't have a lawn with one tree in the middle or one rose bush in the middle that the Japanese beetles devastate. If you have a lot of plants in your yard, everything's going to be spread out. And bug bites are good. We want bug bites on our plant leaves because that means that insects are getting their dinner, and they are eventually going to be dinner for another animal that we care about. So I guess I would encourage, before you pick up a chemical from the store, which it's just insane how easy it is to buy really toxic chemicals. And by the way, another thing is residential people, regular people spraying chemicals in their yard use way more chemicals than farmers do, because I don't know if we just don't really realize how much we need, or we're not trained on it properly, but we just use a ton of chemicals we don't need to use. So do a little bit more research, ask some experts before you run for the chemicals. The native plant list, where can I find a native plant list? So if you go to the City of Council Bluffs city website, there is a Bee City page there now. And we've worked together with the city sanitarians and some other really knowledgeable people on a pretty cool list of plants that are native to the Iowa Council Bluffs area. And that's pretty similar to Omaha. You're just right over the river. The habitat's pretty much the same. But there's a lot of really good resources. Wildflower.org is one of my favorite sites to go to. Let's stick that in the wildflower.org is an excellent website. It's the shoot, I don't know, I can't remember the name of it, but it's some lady's name. Oh, Ladybird Johnson. Okay, words. It's a website dedicated to her, and it's very good. You can do it based on you can make a filter of how bright it is, when does it bloom, how tall does it get, what kind of soil does it need, how much water does it need, and it'll filter it down and help you find native plants that would fit in your site. And Steve, do you have any resources on where they can find more native plant lists?
I just do searches, general searches, and that, like wildflower.org sounds like that might very well end up on one of them.
Yeah, it's a really good website. I really like it.
Mercy had a follow-up question about finding it in Municode. Municode?
Right. No, that's, you probably, unless you have a really progressive city, you're not going to find it there. That's just for their city ordinances. Okay. Anything else, Steve? Does anybody have more questions? Doesn't sound like it.
Okay. Say, Michelle, you also one of the things you do for your job is give tours. Is that
Mhm.
right?
That's right.
Do you want to tell us anything about that?
Yeah, so I work with Potawatomi Conservation. It's in Council Bluffs. Potawatomi is the county we live in. And so I work for the county, and all of the county-owned parks we work at and do programming there, all environmental education type stuff. My office is out of Hitchcock, so we do a lot of work there as well because it's close and it's beautiful. So if you want to see some native plant communities in action and like in the wild to see what plants grow well together, a trip to Hitchcock or Bottom Bend would be a great place to go and see the plants growing in the wild, because our natural areas management people do their best to keep that area healthy and try to keep invasive species out. So if you want to see what's growing there, it's a good place. Like if you have a lot of people in Council Bluffs have a steep hill in their backyard with lots of trees and it's very dry, and that's pretty much what Hitchcock is the less hills, so it's steep and there's a lot of trees and it's dry. And so you can see the species that can survive there. There's all kinds of sedges, different shorter plants, taller plants. If you're a plant person, it's really fun. If you're not, it might just look like a whole colorful, kaleidoscope of green.
Do you recommend a tour?
Well, we don't have like scheduled tours, but there's all kinds of programs that happen. If you go to pottconservation.com, that's our Potawatomi Conservation website, and you can see what programs are coming up and when they're happening and what they're about. There are some really interesting programs happening now. Y'all just missed 2 really cool birding programs. We had Night Out with Nightjars last night, and then we had an introductory to birding this morning. There's more stuff coming. There's all kinds of interesting stuff. But if you want to do a self-guided tour at Hitchcock, you can see remnant prairies there. You can see savannas. You can see wetlands. You can see forest. It's very beautiful.
Very cool.
Okay, well, I guess if there's nothing else, that'll be it for me. Thank you all for coming, and please do your best to make a change, make a difference. Again, start small. Don't bite off more than you can chew, because you still have to maintain those gardens. Even if they're native plants, they still need to be taken care of. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michelle.